Those who cannot change their mind cannot change anything. George Bernard Shaw. And that is what we're going to talk about today on this episode of the Ambitious Procrastinator podcast, all about changing our mind. So I'm going to tee this up right away. The reason for this episode is because I'm actually changing my mind about this podcast. I was trying to do this podcast both on traditional publishing like Spotify and iTunes, and also on YouTube. And I've realized that trying to be on YouTube for my podcast is actually delaying me. It's, do I put makeup on? I didn't today. Is the lighting good? It's okay today because I'm filming later than usual. And so I found myself delaying putting episodes out because I had made the choice to try and also get my podcast onto YouTube. The real reason is because everyone tells me, YouTube is a search engine, which it is, but I was doing it for the wrong reason. And maybe down the road, I'll change my mind again. And once I make my millions and I have my podcast studio and there's a great setup where I don't have to light and change things every week to get a decent looking video, then maybe I'll be back. But for now, if you are watching this on YouTube, thank you for being here. But my guarantee for next week is that you can find me on Spotify, you can find me on Apple Podcasts, but I am not sure if my podcast will be here on YouTube. And if it is, it will be audio only. So I thought, as I was changing my mind, what a great conversation to have with you this week, because sometimes I think we're afraid of taking a step because we're afraid it's the wrong step where we could absolutely change our mind at any time. But the way that we find or get data to decide, is this something I want to do? Is this something I like to do? Is by the doing. The thinking about it is just the preparation. The learning and all the data is found in the doing. And to use my podcast as a point of reference, I found that in the doing of trying to get this up on YouTube, I was delaying, but I could only get that information by trying it. So I think many of us don't try things because we're like, oh, what if it's the wrong thing? And that's when we can change our mind. And then sometimes I work with people that think changing their mind is a bad thing. Well, I've committed to this, and then am I letting people down? So there are a couple of things I wanted to talk about when it comes to changing our mind and when is it time to change our mind. So I think when it comes to us taking action, especially ambitious procrastinators, many of us are waiting for the perfect moment to start, to have it all perfectly figured out before we put something out into the world. Because of this idea of what happens if I need to change something. But the only way we will understand and recognize if what we're doing is something that we enjoy, something that can bring impact to the lives of others, and also influence our own life in a positive way, is by the doing. And I believe everything worth doing is actually a circle, not a linear process, but a circle, especially when it comes to change. So, for example, this podcast, the first step is putting it out into the world. All the preparation and the thinking about it, and that's just preparation. But the learning and the doing and the action happens when I put it out into the world. Now, if we look at that as a linear process, it can be like, I put it out into the world and it's a success or it's a failure. That's crazy. But when we look at important things in a circular reference, it allows us to create movement, which then allows us to create momentum, which then allows us to create data, which then allows us to decide if we want to keep going or if we want to change our minds. So a few months ago, I started this new podcast. I've been doing podcasts on and off, obviously changed my mind a lot since 2018. Actually, I think earlier than that. And I wanted to do a new podcast around ambitious procrastinators. So I started the podcast and I decided to try it both on traditional formats and on YouTube. So that's step one. Then we put it out into the world. And then we need to assess. We give it some time and then we assess what is working, what could maybe be tweaked, and what is not working for us. When we look at it as a circle, it's not a yes or no, a win or lose, hit or a miss, but it's just gathering data, which allows us to get momentum, which allows us to keep going. Sometimes we change our mind. Sometimes we assess that this is working great, and we keep going with that until we get enough data that's telling us or signaling to us that maybe now it's time to make a change of some sort. Not always changing our mind, but maybe changing our approach. So I put my podcast out, and then it was time to assess. The assess is not is it good or bad, but what is working, what could be tweaked, and what needs to change. So I looked at this, I looked at it through the lens of curiosity, not judgment, and go like, I like the content. I think it's really relevant to the work that I'm doing right now and the work I foresee myself doing for the next 5 years. That could change, but I don't know. In this moment, I like what I'm putting out. It's resonant with the other work that I'm doing. And I realized while I was being consistent, there was also weeks when I didn't put a show out. And so I needed to analyze why was that? And every single time it was because I had the content, but maybe I wanted to film in the evening when the lighting wasn't good. And I'm like, so I have to wait till tomorrow. And then maybe tomorrow came and I just got caught up in things. Being on camera narrowed my choices in terms of when I could record. So I assessed that. I'm like, okay, is this something I want to work with, or is this something I want to change? The other choice was I just stopped my podcast, which I didn't want to do. So the change is not all or nothing. So I'm keeping like a good 75% of the podcast, but I'm letting go of that 25% that's on camera. So it's not like this is a win or a loss. It's like, I just need to adapt this in this moment. Maybe it will change down the road if I get, like I said, if I get my millions and I get a 2 or 3 bedroom where I can set up a studio. Oh, that's been my dream, by the way. Then maybe we'll come back on camera. But for now, as of next week, this is going to be audio only. That's just using my podcast as an example. Can you think of an area in your life right now that maybe you haven't been as consistent as you would like to have been? And instead of going, well, that was a failure, revisit the thing that you want to do, or the project, or the dream, or whatever you started and you stopped. And instead of going, that was a win or a loss, a hit or a miss, go circle of evidence, really. Analyze, okay, this is what I did. And then instead of looking at it through the lens of black or white, go, what did I enjoy about that? What was working? And then maybe there's a little piece of that that went, you know what? If I just tweak this ever so slightly, I don't need to let it go, but it's going to bring me more enjoyment. For example, there was a part of me that was going to say, I'm just going to end this podcast. I'm like, that's not what the answer is. The answer is you just need to make it a little bit easier and have more flexibility on your schedule when you're in this 1-bedroom apartment right now that is a little limited because I have the ocean outside, but I also have a little bit of a busy street. So it helps for me to film in the evenings or early in the morning. It sounds like excuses, which maybe it could be, but it's also reasons why instead of going, I'm going to let it go, I'm just going to tweak it slightly to make this podcast be more in alignment with the situation that I'm in right now. So can you do that in your life? Is there something that you let go that maybe had you looked at it through the lens of data, the circle of data, a circle of creativity, and instead of going, well, that didn't work out, go, if I'd made this little tweak, would I continue to keep going? We hear so often that the only constant is change, but sometimes we really struggle with what changing our mind means. It doesn't mean that you're not committed. It doesn't mean that you don't have the discipline. It doesn't mean you don't have the willpower. But sometimes what happens is we've invested so much time or so much of our identity into something, giving the thing up feels like more of a loss, then maybe we're actually losing ourselves in this project if it no longer serves us. This is called the sunk cost fallacy. You see this in relationships. I'll use myself as an example. If you're in a relationship that maybe isn't going as you had hoped, but maybe you're 5, 6, 7 years in, and you think, well, I put all this time into this relationship. If I just try harder, things will change. And as we know, the only person we can change is ourselves. So sometimes we do that in relationships. Sometimes we might do that in investments. We've put and invested our money in something and it's tanking. And look, I'm not an investment strategist here, so don't take any advice. But sometimes we invest our finances in something or our time into something or our attention or our hearts. And because we spent so much time or even money, we're afraid to cut the cord and cut our losses. This is the sunk cost fallacy. But in reality, what you might gain on the other side by cutting your losses could be much, much greater than any loss you would occur in that moment. And while I'm not a financial advisor, this in many areas of our lives, the sunk cost fallacy can often stop us from gaining all the rewards in the future because of what we're thinking that we're giving up from our past. One other thing I want to tap into in this short episode is this idea of the feelings that can come up when we decide to change our mind or we're thinking of changing our mind. Remember, feelings are not always facts, but every feeling begins with a thought. And sometimes when we're considering whether or not to change our mind, it's an emotional feeling that comes up with what we think other people are going to think of us. Well, if I've committed to this, but now I change my mind to do that, what will other people think of me? I see this so often that people will stay committed to something for the fear of being judged by other people. And I think in a world that we're living in right now, it seems to be very, very polarized. This or that, black or white, my opinion or your opinion. I'm right, you're wrong. And we've lost our ability to live in the gray, to try things for the adventure of trying and be less attached to the outcome and more attached to the action. The fact that you've taken the confidence to try something new. But if you're waiting to try something, thinking that you're never going to change your mind about it, you'll be waiting forever. Or you'll get into something and you'll be so far down the road that maybe 5 months ago you wanted to change your mind, but you stuck at it because what will this person say? What will they think? What will so and so? And then we're again losing all of this possibility for our future because of being anchored to what people may or may not think about us. Here is the thing. Many people I've worked with think that changing their mind is a sign of weakness. In fact, it's the opposite. I believe changing your mind is a sign of strength. Changing your mind means you're betting on yourself that there is something more for me than this. Changing your mind is putting your values out into the world. And sometimes something that worked a few months ago is no longer in alignment with our values. So do we keep going for the person that we used to be? Or do we change our mind and change our actions to be in alignment with the person we are today? And then the person we're going to become. I don't know about you, but I surely hope that this is not the end. I've got so many years ahead of me, and you have too. And I'm excited to see the person I have yet to become. And I would guess that the decisions I make, I would guess, and I kind of hope that the decisions and the choices I make 5 years from now are going to be very different to the ones I'm making today. Changing your mind is not a weakness. But one invitation before I go is when you decide to change your mind, ask yourself why. Why am I changing my mind? Is it because I'm afraid of something? Well, then maybe I'm going to invite you to keep going a little bit longer. Work with the facts versus the fears. Or maybe when you're thinking of changing your mind, it's just like, this is not fun anymore, or I don't enjoy doing this anymore. And then it's okay to change your mind. Every time you change your mind is opening up the gateway for new opportunities and possibilities to step in. It's okay to change your mind about what you want to do. It's okay to change your mind about who you want to be. It's okay to change your mind about where you want to go. It's okay to change your mind about where you want to live. Many of these changes only involve us. And when these changes do involve others, I encourage us all to have an open and heartfelt dialogue. Sometimes, if this involves another person, we might be surprised at their thoughts and observations on the situation. It might bring us closer in the dialogue, or it might allow us to both have two very different opinions without making the other person wrong. Open dialogue is the key to positive change when it involves somebody else. But many of the times where I see people stuck is change only involving our own decisions, our own actions, and how we want to show up in the world. So this week, the next time you decide to change your mind, ask yourself why. Why am I deciding to change the choice that I made however long ago? And if it has nothing to do with fear, I invite you to explore the possibility of how your life might unfold should you make a different choice. And if it is based in fear, not that that's wrong, I invite you to sit with it just a little bit longer and see what is under the fear. Because maybe there is a change you can make to face your fears and do it anyway versus changing your pathway completely. So until next week, where you can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Have a great week.